Hello guys, the DB Grinder here, back at it again with another video, and this time I am going to be going over the board breaker meta tier list for post SUDA, and let's go ahead and hop right in with some side events, which is trash cards. I do not think you should be playing these. We'll start with these because these are pretty easy to go over. So I feel like Dark Hole, Raigeki, well, Raigeki's obviously better than Dark Hole. Well, I guess it technically depends what deck you're playing, but both these cards are pretty poor in the format overall. They're not very good against any of the meta decks, I don't think. So now, next card would be Super Poly. I feel like this card's really bad into the format also. Like, maybe you're playing, like, some weird deck that is able to make this card work, but overall, like, using this against the meta decks, like, without using your own cards, this card just isn't very great. Now, honestly, we'll go to main deck worthy next. So Talons is definitely main deck worthy. This card's a very solid card overall, especially if you're trying to build your deck with like a little bit of a mixture between hand traps and board breakers. This is definitely one of those board breakers. You know, it's good going first, it's good going second. Going first, if you activate the effect to look at the hand, usually the game's just over. It's crazy that when someone activates Talons, you're praying for them to activate the draw 2 effect. Next main deck worthy card, I guess we'll do Thrust next. Depends on like what deck you're playing, obviously, and how your deck is built. But if you're playing something with like the Striker engine in it, this is very strong. If you're playing like Mitsurugi, this card can end up being very strong. You could obviously side deck this card in some decks, trying to like set floodgates going first, like Mischief of the Gnomes, D-Barrier, DDG, Sanctum in the Lancia. Like, there's multiple things that you can set off this, and there's also like stuff in engines that you can set. You can set like the Malice traps. You could also just set something as simple as Imperm. But okay, now next main deck worthy card is Engage. If you're playing this card, you're definitely playing it in the main deck. This card has definitely lost some value going into the next format because Twins of the Eclipse is going to be released in post SUDA. So this card's not as good as it once was because it used to be like Engage, Widow Anchor, Target Detonator, and now Detonator's outed. But now they can like chain Detonator effect, pop itself, and then Eclipse of the Twins, summon back out Detonator. But if you're building your deck with infinite breakers in it, then you could probably break the Detonator again. And like it also will at least make your stuff like Thrust and Talons live too. So now let's see. Next main deck worthy card, Forbidden Droplet. Really depends on like what deck you're playing. If this card's like, I feel like that's how a lot of these breakers are. It really depends on like what deck you're playing, how you're building your deck. Like a lot goes into playing breakers compared to hand traps, where hand traps are pretty simple. Where breakers, like, you know, you kind of need to build your whole deck around it a little bit more. But Droplet's also very good for outing stuff like Abyss Dweller. If your deck has a problem with that, you can also use this to out something like Detonator plus DDD. And also the Twins of the Eclipse underneath of it won't matter too much unless if your opponent has like a Baldric that's able to tribute the Detonator, or if they have like a Nib in hand that's able to tribute the Detonator off. Otherwise, the Twins of the Eclipse won't matter until you make it matter because you choose when the Detonator gets outed then. Now, the next main deck worthy card. This one's like a little, I guess we'll put Book of Eclipse up here. I think this card's like a decent breaker overall. Like this might be like top of side deck worthy. But if you're playing it, you're probably playing it in the main deck. I think this card's pretty solid overall. I guess while I also talk about that book, I'll also put Book of Moon in decent cards. I think Book of Moon is probably better just going first because if you're using it as a defensive card, then you don't really want to be using Book of Eclipse because you don't want your opponent to draw 2 to 3 cards, especially when everyone's playing so many hand traps this format, because then they will draw their defensive cards off of it. But Book of Moon going first is still like decent. Going second, it's decent. Again, like post SUDA, this card definitely becomes worse. Like a lot of these cards become worse post SUDA just because Twins of the Eclipse beats a lot of these breakers. Also, okay, now talking about the last card that could be like main deck worthy, top of side deck worthy, will be Metaltronus. This card is really cool. You can use this card and target something like DDD and summon Desiree from your extra deck, and then you can use Desiree to go into like Requiem, and like, you know, you can start facilitating your Fiendsmith plays off of that while also shutting down DDD. This can also out something like Dweller if your deck has a problem with it. It can also out Detonator and banish it face down if you are also playing Detonator in your deck. So this card's pretty cool. This card's pretty cool with what you can do with it. Now going over side deck worthy cards, I think top of side deck worthy should just be Ultimate Slayer. A lot of people side deck this card because this also deals with Twins of the Eclipse very well. Then you can also dump something like Mirror Logic, and then Mirror Logic shut down the DDD. So you can honestly deal with a lot of the end board with just Ultimate Slayer. And also, this works well with hand traps too. Like if you hand trap your opponent like twice, and they just end on Detonator Pass, or they just end on DDD Pass, or they just end on a little bit pass, you can Ultimate Slayer to like out the monster on field very well. Now, you can also dump something like Accepton Knight, which will work well with your Fiendsmith plays. Let's see, next side deck worthy card. This is gonna be weird because I feel like this might also. I should have talked about this card before, but this card could also be like main deck worthy, top of side deck worthy. Like if you're playing, honestly, I'll probably put it in decent cards. Like it's pretty decent overall. I don't think a lot of decks will be main decking this or anything. But this card is pretty cool at being able to like dodge things and steal. Because you can go ahead and steal something like DDD if your deck has a problem with it. Also, like the Mitsurugi cards get their effects when they're tributed. So something like Econ can also work with that too. Now, let's see. What would go in the rest of like side deck worthy? I think like if you play Thrust in your deck, maybe you have something like Harpies in your side deck as a one of, especially if you're taking your deck to like a locals or a regionals. You might end up playing against some like, some back row type decks, and you're able to go ahead and use Thrust into Harpies and beat those decks. Same with something like Lightning Storm. Honestly, I'll put Lightning Storm above Harpies. Lightning Storm just does what Harpies does, but better. It just has more options behind it. Obviously, if you're playing like a bunch of Bystials in your deck, a bunch of Bystials, maybe some copies of Nib, then, maybe you don't end up playing Lightning Storm. Maybe you just play Harpies instead. But I still think these cards are like decent cards overall. Then I think that's it for side deck worthy, and honestly the rest of these cards are just going to go into decent cards, and I'll talk about them. So the first one is Fenrir. This card's like decent overall. I don't think I would be playing this card right now. If your engine plays it, like if you're playing Kashira Unicorn in your deck, then obviously you can play Fenrir. This card's like decent going second. If you have like hand traps with it, you can hand trap your opponent a bunch, then summon Fenrir, and then Fenrir does feel very strong. Or if you have like a bunch of breakers plus Fenrir, but Fenrir by itself is not doing very much. But to be fair, a lot of these breakers by themselves are not doing very much into the format. You kind of need like a mixture of hand traps and breakers, or you need a lot of breakers. Or you need like a strong engine with breakers, like the Ryzeal Mitsurugi deck, how X Ryzeal, Bonfire, Natter's Servant, all these cards act as board breakers. So then you can also play board breakers in the deck, and that's why we've seen people try to cut hand traps from the deck and just play breakers. Now we also have seen people play hand traps in the deck, because the deck has a lot of different options. Evenly match, it'd probably be like low down here. Like these cards would probably be low down here. I think Change of Heart even is like pretty low. Honestly, Dark Ruler is pretty slept on. Like, I don't think this card's like that broken. It's honestly not good against a lot of the decks, but I think a lot of people hate on this card a little bit too much. Like, it's honestly not that bad of a card. Fenrir, not the greatest, not the worst. Change of Heart. So this is literally just a better mind control. It's just at 1 while this is at 3. Like, this card's decent. If you're able to, like, first action, activate, target DDD Wave High King Caesar, that's honestly not bad, but you would have had to stop your opponent from getting to something like Detonator. And then also against something like Malice, this won't be good. Against Mitsurugi, this won't be good. Against a lot of the top meta decks, this card just won't really be good. It's just really only for, like, the one deck. So it's even then you have to hand trap your opponent on top of that for this card to even be that good. But if you can first action take DDD, then you're able to stop something like their Lacrima and Graveyard Effect, a potential Bystial, a potential Nib. So you can stop a lot with it if you're able to do that first action after you've already hand trapped your opponent's like Duo Drive. Evenly match, the card's not that great. Honestly, the boards right now aren't that big. Maybe you can end up using it against something like Malice, because like Malice is starting to cut the Terahertz combo, so maybe evenly match becomes better against them. Mitsurugi sets up a trap that is just a negate. Ryzeal Fiendsmith, the board doesn't have to be that big. Like if you activate evenly, you might out like Cross, DDD, and maybe a setback row. But now you're guaranteed not ending the game. You're taking it to a grind game against the Fiendsmith engine. They have Detonator probably twice because of the Eclipse Twins. And they have Lacrima. into Requiem and the Lacrima and the Dump Trap plus hand traps, and like, you know, you're not even guaranteed hitting a set card, because the set card would just be like Imperm, if they happen to draw like an Imperm, or if they play like Solemn Strike or something like that in their side deck, or they set a card as a bluff and now they evenly takes it out. And then Mind Control is like, it's pretty much the same as Change of Heart, to be honest. Like, these are probably both down here. They're not very great. But this is just like a worse version of this. And with all that being said, the DB Grinder signing off. Peace. Have a nice day. Stay safe.